I always love starting with pen and paper. I knew what I wanted to convey before going into bird species, there are like 700 in the US alone. I wanted to ease into it. So I thought, well, how do I visualize that? And I actually started out with a little sketch with feathers around the circle, with the feathers getting smaller around the circle. Then I started abstracting that more in towards lines and putting dots on the lines. At some point, I thought, well, no, instead of feathers, what about eggs? Eggs around the circle. And then I thought, well, eggs around the circle kind of looks like, eggs in a nest. And so that's how my next sketch is already sort of eggs around a circle with like a little nest around it. It's like, yes, this is it. I just want to make a nest filled with eggs.
So hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Secrets of the Viz. Today I have the absolute honor of inviting Nadieh, who is a well-known name in the Dataviz world. She is the rising star of Information is Beautiful in 2016, Best Individual in 2017, and after that, multiple goals in numerous of her business. She's also an author of 2 books, Chart and Data Sketches, as well as having a course on Skillshare called Customizing Charts for Beauty and Impact. So over to you, Nadieh, to talk a little bit about yourself and your journey so far.
Thank you so much for having me and for the introduction. Yeah, I'm a data visualization designer and artist these days, but started out as an astronomer, which most people think is a bit of a weird flip going from one to the other, but it felt like a very natural jump to go. Astronomy is connected to a lot of data analysis, and that's how I discovered that data visualization is where my true love really lies.
And you have a couple of space-themed visits as well.
Yes, I love it when clients reach out to me to do something astronomy based because it gives me a little bit of a way back. How do you say that? I miss the learning of things about astronomy. I don't miss the whole sort of academic writing papers, having to go for grants, the politics. That's not something I miss.
Definitely. Cool. So today I want to talk about a very special viz of yours, which you have published recently called Searching for Birds. On the starting portion of your viz, you have this snowy owl and this narrative that's like the cold November nights and everyone sees this snowy owl. I think a couple of years back, I did read an article saying that Harry Potter caused a huge spike in number of people wanting to adopt a snowy owl because Harry Potter has one. And there was a lot of abandoned owls due to that as well. So I'm not too sure if that contributed to the decline of how we see snowy owls in the wilds.
Yeah, so the article starts with this moment in 2021 when the snowy owls spotted in Central Park. And I think why people were interested was definitely due to this sort of nostalgia that we have for the snowy owl in Harry Potter. I think maybe if Harry Potter wasn't around, fewer people would have been interested in that snowy owl coming to Central Park. But I think just the fact that it was there for the first time in over 100 years would have already sparked a lot of imagination and people wanting to come take a look, though.
I mean, it's kind of like Harry Potter magical in that sense as well, right?
It is, yes. It does add an extra little bit of magic there, yeah.
So your first section after that actually starts off by saying that you are not a bird person. And I know that often when we start a new viz, we want to do a lot of research on a topic. What are your process when it comes to doing research on a topic that you're not familiar with?
Ooh, tricky. It's first trying to get a feeling for what is available. And it's slightly different for projects that I do for clients because then I'm limited to whatever they can supply to me. But this one was slightly different. On the one hand, it was for Google Trends. So I could go to the Google Trends webpage and then just search for birds, which already gave me interesting things about some birds and patterns. But there are so many other public bird data sets out there. So in this case, that's where I started, just to get a sense of what kind of bird data sets do you have? Well, there's population data, there's eBird, where people record sightings of birds and that gets published online. There's information about the birds themselves, how big are they? How old do they get? How do they look? How many eggs do they have per clutch? I just want to explore how people connect to birds by how they search for them. So it started out very broad. And honestly, I spent way too much time in that phase for this particular project, actually, because there was just so much. So I made hundreds of different plots, and honestly, only through the help of my project writer, Emily, that we finally started to narrow it down again into what the actual story should be. And then that's when it finally came to me. It's like, oh, okay, so I need to look at these data sets in this way and explain these particular points out of all of the information that I've gathered.
Yeah, I guess going into a topic that you're not familiar with does run the risk of going down different rabbit holes.
Yeah.
So straight away after that section, you have this bird nest with all the little eggs and all the different states. I love the animations for that. It's so smooth and fun to explore. How do you arrive at the inspiration of doing it in a bird nest to represent this data set?
That was actually a bit of I didn't get to it right away. I just started sketching. I always love starting with pen and paper. I sometimes go towards to my iPad to make it a little bit more concrete. But I knew what I wanted to convey before going into bird species, which there are like 700 in the US alone. I wanted to ease into it. So let's first talk about these bird types like hawks and eagles and ducks as a whole, like these things that people actually know. I mean, I know there is hawks, and I might not know a species of hawk, but I know there are hawks. With looking at Google Trends, what of these bird types do people search for the most? What is the ranking? And so I thought, well, how do I visualize that? And I actually started out with a little sketch with feathers around the circle, with the feathers getting smaller around the circle. Then I started abstracting that more in towards lines and putting dots on the lines. At some point, I thought of, well, no, instead of feathers, what about eggs? Eggs around a circle. And then I thought, well, eggs around a circle kind of looks like, eggs in a nest. And so that's how my next sketch is already sort of eggs around a circle with like a little nest around it. So that's kind of roughly how that thought process went. Because I generally do like it when I can put metaphors into the visual design, because I find it clicks more easily and it usually makes it a little bit more visually appealing if you can have a good metaphor that fits with the topic that you are displaying. With the topic is whimsical and fun as birds, I knew I had to go really deep on the metaphors. So when I had this idea of the nest, it just felt totally right. It's like, yes, this is it. I don't need to explore further. I just want to make a nest filled with eggs.
I absolutely love that. Like, I think having a thematic design to any visualization makes it a lot more approachable and interesting for folks to actually dive into.
Mhm.
I do had a question on the colors of the eggs and the design on each of the eggs. Are they the original, like how it looked like for the individual birds, or they're just like part of the design?
I first wanted to make each egg look or be inspired by the bird they represented. When I started looking into actual egg designs, they're fascinating, but they're a little bit too same. A lot of them are just kind of off-white with maybe some speckles on them. I mean, there's a fascinating turquoise blue one, which I forgot which bird it was. For my style of data visualization, which is usually very vibrant colors, it just wasn't quite there. So it was more inspired by the general eggs that there are, but colored in red, yellow, orange, and green. I don't think there are many green eggs.
That's interesting. I guess sometimes the thematic design don't fit the idea that we had. But I think with the egg design, it's very interesting because the size of it represents the search volume. And as
Mhm.
you hover through the different states, it gets shuffled in terms of the ranking. I absolutely love that animation.
Thanks. And that animation actually took a long time to get right because I wanted them to move around that circle, preferably even see them rolling around. But this was already stretching my CPU, so I knew that rolling was just a step too far, sadly.
Well, rolling will be, really mind-blowing.
Yeah, I wish.
I'm a big fan of using one chart to explain a story. So you have this little Voronoi chart that goes through how you actually identify your spark bird and the journey of discovering of spark bird, and you go through like a breadcrumb scrolly telly experience.
Mhm.
And I love that because it makes the audience very involved in the whole storytelling aspect. Totally had no idea what this whole concept of spark bird is. Is this from somewhere, or was this an idea that you came by?
Oh no, I'm also like an amateur birder. I mean, I love birds and I have places to watch birds from my window. But to prepare for the story, me and Emily had some interviews with bird experts to get a better understanding of how do people evolve from going into I don't know bird species to I am like full on birding. This is my new hobby. So how do people make that jump? And they all started talking about spark birds. It's a concept that is a thing in the world of birding in a way. All of them mentioned the idea of a spark bird being the jumping off point for people wanting to know more about that particular bird and then wanting to know more about more birds. It just was clear to us that we needed to introduce spark bird in our story as well in some way.
That's really interesting. Do you have a spark bird of your own?
I don't think I do, and not in the way that these people somehow describe it, but there is a bird that when I see it, I always have to look at it. But it's a gorgeous finch type of bird with really nice colors, especially for the Netherlands. Birds in the Netherlands, I think, aren't quite that colorful. There's no blue jay or northern cardinal here, although we do have a really cute robin. The European robin is much cuter than the American one, I would say.
Yeah, I probably have to find my spot bird. I don't think I have any. I'm not a birder as well.
Well, I can hit you. That's the idea. It's like you may not know it, but when you see it, I will hit you.
I think the closest is probably the snowy owl, I guess. If I'm going to think about it.
It is a very nice bird.
Yeah, probably my favorite section of your viz because you
Mhm.
have this Voronoi chart in an egg that's
Yeah.
covered with feathers. So your feathers didn't go to waste because you still had it around this
Exactly.
little egg motif. And I love that because from the start, you have this breakdown of the chart, which you can't interact with, but the data is there. And as you scroll through, you start to introduce the concepts slowly, the ornithologist's way of classifying the 25 unique shapes of birds and then
Mhm.
going into the 76 types, allowing the users then to hover and explore through the tooltips. I thought that was really ingenious. Like, how do you come about this whole process of getting through this tree section for the same chart?
I knew that the sort of the meat of the story would always have to be on the bird species, but 700 just felt like too much to introduce. That's why we had the nest before with just bird types. And this was going to be the section where I would go from 25 bird types towards these 700 species. So I thought, would I do that? And then, like you said, the Cornell Labs All About Birds website, they have 25 shapes, 75 types, and then species. So that felt like a very good structure to hold on to it. So I felt like, well, if I can explain that in steps, going from these shapes, these types to species, that makes sense to me. So I knew that I wanted to do something scrolly telling style. It's kind of like a tree map. All of these species, they fall into specifically one type, which fall into specifically one shape. It just made sense. And I've always been a fan of the Voronoi tree maps. I mean, when I can make one, I do it. And also because I know that you can sort of have the outside shape be any shape that you want, as long as you can put it into a formula in a way. And so it was also that after I had the nest, my next drawing, thinking about that, was already like a giant egg. That one came to me pretty clearly then. It's like, okay, so I want to do a Voronoi tree map. Well, obviously it has to resemble an egg shape. When it came more to the details, it was a little bit tricky because the actual visualization first kind of cracks the egg into these 700 little cells. But it wasn't clear to me at the start, should I not do that and only show these 25 different types and then split that into the 75 types and then the species? But I kind of felt that it would make sense to show them at the start, but not make them hoverable yet, like you said, but only introduce that later and be very specific in the text. Like from this point on, you can actually hover it and get more information so that the information is fed to the reader at the right moment in time.
I feel like after you had that nest idea, everything just falls into place. Like in terms of
Yes.
like the design.
Definitely, yes. It was definitely, once you have your main idea and the design for that, it just feeds into how the rest should look, for sure.
I love the fact that you also embedded an AI assistant tool to kind of find your bird. I have never seen this being done in a visualization before, and I thought that was really interesting. What gave you the idea to put something like that in your viz?
Um, well, it was twofold. On the one hand, the people at Google, they asked me, do you have an interesting way you could maybe introduce AI into this as well? And I thought about several things. They said, like, maybe there's like a chart builder so people can say, oh, give me the data for this particular state. But I felt like the way I would want to design that, it wouldn't quite work to have an AI chart builder because it would not be in the style that I want. But I thought, well, personally, what I have is that you have these great apps on your phone like Merlin and Birda that help you identify birds. And often it's done via sound, and I use that a lot. You can also do it with photos. But sometimes I don't have photos or sound. It's like, oh, I saw a bird over there. It was red and it had a black beak. What bird was that? Like I can tell you how it looked, but that's all that I have. And I felt like these apps, they don't have that. They make you go through this kind of stepper where you have to select things and it never quite matches what you really thought it was. And I felt like I just want to type it like it's ChatGPT or Gemini. And so I thought, well, that feels like it gives value in a way that I feel like would also fit this story. It's like just have an AI bird helper where you can explain the bird that you saw and it will help you try and find it. It's like, oh, is it this bird? Is it that bird? And once you say like, oh yeah, it is that bird, I then actually wrote a little thing that works together with making these little charts around, oh, this is how that bird actually looked on Google Trends. This is when its breeding season is, but it also tries to wrap that all into how a person might explain it to another person instead of having only bullet points. Like it lays 3 to 5 eggs, it breeds from then to then. It's like it puts it into a nice conversational style. So yeah.
I love that.
Thanks.
Maybe let's go on a tangent a little bit.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about AI in the world of Dataviz? Like, how should we as Dataviz practitioner learn to embrace AI in our tools or processes?
I think I personally see it like a junior developer where it makes programming go faster. I don't have to always look things up how I do. Like, give me a function that calculates line intersections. I don't have to look that up on Stack Overflow anymore. I just let the AI figure that out. And it also really helped when I did the Sparkbird AI helper, because that was completely new to me, working with the Gemini models. That was definitely something that otherwise would have cost me at least 2-3 times as long to figure out. I've also tried to use it for inspiration, but honestly, that hasn't worked yet. I could also be my prompting. Maybe I'm just not a good prompter yet, but it's never quite creative enough for me, for what I want. So what I am a little bit scared of is maybe that with AI, it might get too easy to create the straightforward charts. But that doesn't mean that they're the right charts. And just like you have AI slop in images and videos, you can get AI slop with charts. It's like, yeah, the data is now made visual, but it doesn't make sense to do it this way, or it doesn't even make sense. That's what I'm afraid of, where people might just accept what AI has done and they don't question it, or they don't think about, is this the way this data is actually helping the people interpret the data? That's kind of my fear. Beyond, the standard, is AI going to take over my job? I hope I can still, doing the creative stuff, I can still carve out my own niche.
Yeah. So I come from the video games industry, and I think one of the concerns that a lot of creative folks have is the homogenization of creative assets. Do you see that potentially happening in Dataviz world? Like all pie charts will look the same, all line charts will look the same, and stuff like that.
I think definitely, yes. But if you look at the standard sort of dashboarding tools, Power BI, Tableau, Data Wrapper, the Flourish, a lot of these give you tools to go beyond the default. They all have their own defaults, but they're kind of the same. A line chart is axes and a line numbers. I think maybe you could say that in charts, homogeneity is almost already there even before AI, because it's like the sterile version of a chart is the homogeneity that we already have. And from there on, that's when people come in to build out on that and think about, how am I going to make this look more on brand? How am I going to make this look more visually appealing? So it's there, but it's different than what I would think for the video industry, at least in my eyes.
Hopefully not. We still need that creative minds of humans to create meaningful stories in the world.
Exactly.
One section that I really like on your Viz, which is the Sankey diagram, where you have the what we see and what we don't, the sightings of eBirds user in the US. In the middle, you have Google search interest, and then at the right side, you have the estimated US and Canada population of the species. On just a first look, this tree, even though seemingly disjoint, it works very well together.
Thanks. Yeah, so that chart actually came from my realization that most of the birds that are the most popular by far, I mean, we're talking in the hundreds of millions, they don't even register on Google. The majority of people don't know they exist, even though there are more of them than there are Americans. I thought that was so interesting, and I wanted to convey that. So eBird is where people mark their sightings of these birds, like, oh, I saw an American robin today at this location. And then when I compare that to Google searches, there's a much bigger overlap between what is popular on Google and the birds that get the most sightings on eBird. And so I thought that would be an interesting sort of difference to show, where you have the Google search sort of interest in the center, which is sort of the prime thermometer for which birds are most popular online, apparently. And on the right is what should actually be most populous. So sort of putting these two side by side, connecting them, because some of the birds do appear in the top 20 of all three of these, but that there are so many birds that don't appear in either of these two lists, so they are grayed out. And that's kind of where the flow came from, wanting to show where the connections were between these three data sets, but also showing that a lot of them don't have connections.
The last chart I wanted to talk to you about was where you have the different waves. And I thought that was really interesting because it corresponds with the migration patterns of birds itself. But you also weave in a story over there talking about pandemic, the migration, and the waves of interest. It's quite a long time frame from 2016. Was there any additional research you had to do to understand how all these trends changed over the years?
I did go much, much deeper on the time series. I looked into specifically into migration patterns, but the data was too noisy to be able to say something good enough for that to put into the story. I also did like a seasonality decomposition where you try to split it out, the seasonal component, the trend, and the remainder. Anyway, like I looked at then, and then I looked at hundreds of charts of birds to see which one would show something interesting. But in the end, it was just coming back down to the basics. So you would see that this April and June peak happens every year. That was really the crux of it eventually, I realized. So keeping it to what I started out with, even though I did this whole rabbit hole into migration and into other things. Sometimes that is the thing in a way. It's like you've done all hours of extra work and you kind of just have to realize that, it's good that I know that that is not a thing, but then we're sticking with where I was several days ago.
It is hard, right?
Exactly. It's hard, but yeah, kill your darlings is not a saying for nothing. It's definitely definitely a
Yep,
thing.
definitely a thing. What would you say is the most challenging part of this project?
I think maybe the hardest part was finding the story and the design. I went into so many different directions for the design. My initial idea was to do actually something with natural history, these old plates of people 200 years ago drawing these birds. I have a Pinterest board with 6 different directions, but eventually the idea of making it somehow inspired by children's books, like these drawings and more whimsical, was the thing that I was drawn to the most. And especially when I started drawing, it's like, yes, I have to draw an X nest. And that really only came once we found the story, thanks to my writer Emily is trying to cut down on all of these ideas I had in my mind and find the core of what we were actually looking at. Those were the 2 hardest things. And on the one hand, I think keeping your enthusiasm for 6 months, I'm more of a person that, after a max of 2, 3 months, I'm like so fed up with it. I want to do something new. But this particular project, I think because I also enjoy how I could be so free and creative in my visual design, I was just enthusiastic until the end. Although there was definitely I'm really ready to publish this and be done with it. But that was less extreme than other longer lasting projects, I would say.
A very random question, but kind of intrigued me. How did that name Visualizing Cinnamon came about?
Yes. So it's a bit of a silly story, honestly. When I was just starting out with data analysis and a little bit of data visualization, I felt so alone where I was working. I was really the only one that started to get a little bit more interest there. And I thought, well, I'll share what I've learned on a blog. Maybe that's a way I can connect with other people. It's like, hey, I wrote this blog and maybe they can comment on the blog. I wanted to have my own domain name. And honestly, at that point in time in my life, I never expected that I would become a freelancer. I felt like too much job insecurity. I want to have a steady paycheck at the end of the month. So I didn't give it that much thought. So what I did was I went to a random word generator website and I just clicked through it. And then the word cinnamon appeared. And I was like, oh, hey, cinnamon. Well, that's easy to spell, easy to say. I like cinnamon. It makes everything taste better. And I kind of like that concept of where, add a little bit of spice to your stuff and it makes it better. And so that's as visual cinnamon. I felt like, oh, sure, yeah, it's a domain name. It stands out. And then, 3 years later, I did decide to go into freelance and I was stuck with the name. But on the other hand, I kind of like how it's a little bit off.
But it makes you very unique in the space itself. People would recommend, like cinnamon. Oh, that's Nadieh.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I guess maybe being a little bit strange is a good thing.
It is a good thing. Like I said earlier, I'm a huge fanboy of your work. Thank you so much for spending time with us today, walking us through your process, your inspiration, and everything you've done to get this amazing viz out there. We'll see everyone at the next episode. Thank you.